Welcome to today's webinar, Doing More with Less, Creating an Agile and Adaptive Talent Acquisition Strategy. I have a few housekeeping notes before we begin. If you have any questions or technical concerns, please use the Q&A module on your screen. You can resize and minimize the different modules on your screen by using the options in the top right corner of each module. This event is being recorded and can be watched later on demand using the same link. Attendees will receive the recording of today's event. Look for that email within 24 hours post-event. We encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A module throughout the event for our speakers to address. You can also use the reaction module in the menu at the bottom to relay items you may like or want to express an emotion to. And now I will pass the stage to Rebecca Warren, Director of Customer Success.
Hey folks, Rebecca Warren and Andrea Lund coming to you live. Super excited to be with you today. Be here with you all today. Just as a quick setting the stage of what we're going to talk about, there's a lot going on in today's world, and we need to be prepared as TA or HR professionals, as leaders, and as organizations. So we're all being asked to do more with less and still make sure that positions get filled with the right people, employees are staying engaged and growing, and all the while making sure folks can bring their whole selves to work. So we're going to talk through all of that and probably some other stuff too. Hopefully you'll leave our chat with some thought starters as well as actions you can take to stay positive and on top of things. So Rebecca Warren, I run a portfolio of accounts at Eightfold. I previously was in talent acquisition, going from recruiter all the way up to senior director for several large restaurant, retail, and CPG organizations. Been at Eightfold for about 2 years now, and I live outside of the Phoenix area. I'm going to flip it over to Andrea to introduce herself, and then we're going to get started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Lund. I have been in the talent acquisition, organizational development, and organizational excellence space, and really have been focused on DEI AB for quite a few years now. I specifically work primarily with startups and nonprofits and have been for the last 10, 15-ish years, primarily in the technology space. I've been pretty niched in tech for, well, longer than I'd like to admit. Don't let the Botox is working these days. So I really have been working with startups and nonprofits to help them grow and scale, is my expertise levels. So most recently, I've been with Version 1 and Minnesota Rocker, which has been a very new endeavor for me. They are an esports company, and I've literally recently just rolled off from that organization. So, and now I'm working with a local nonprofit, so that I'm very excited to be with. So I'm super excited to share that expertise and really bring my background for establishing infrastructure and processes with that really strong focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging to the conversation. So excited to be here.
Fabulous. So Andrea and I have been friends for quite a while. We have never actually worked together, but we have worked in networking spaces, and our thought partners, we bounce off of each other and have conversations about this stuff actually on the reg. So we're excited to be able to jump right in and learn a little bit more about what y'all think about some things happening in TA right now. So we are going to go to our poll, and we would love to know, what do you feel is the biggest challenge you're facing in TA or HR today? And you may hate all of the choices. We just put some out there. So if there's other things that are facing you as well, feel free to throw those in the chat. But we're going to be talking about potentially hiring freezes or not enough work to do. Maybe it's finding candidates or unrealistic expectations from hiring managers, manual or outdated processes. Could be getting employees upskilled or reskilled, might be tool fatigue. I've heard a lot about that lately. Or maybe you're just like, nope, we're sailing into the sunset. We have no challenges. All is good. And if that's you, if you have F, we all want to meet you.
Tell us your secrets.
Tell us. All right. So, and I think, Andrea, we talked about this, that I think all of these are some things that we've experienced sometimes in the far past, but most of these probably in the pretty near past.
I think maybe the one that we forgot to add is all of the above.
That's right. Everything's on fire, but I'm fine.
Yeah, maybe just that emoji with the dog with the coffee.
That's
with
right.
The burning
Everything
going
burning
on.
behind.
Everything's fine. Everything's
Yeah.
fine.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna advance to the poll results. I think, have we given it enough time, you think? Let's see. Sure. All right, we've gone to results. Oh, we do have 2% in the no challenges. So we love you and we need to learn from you. So find us after this webinar. All right, so finding candidates or unrealistic expectations from hiring managers.
No!
What? That never happens.
No! How much do we want to bet? I mean, I know we've been to Vegas a few times together, that it's the latter. The unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, that's right.
Managers.
That's right. Because no matter what happens in the market, hiring managers aren't changing their expectations. We're finding that a lot. They still want what they want, whether it's realistic or not. That's on TA or HR, not on the hiring manager. So, and I get it. I mean, I've been a hiring manager as well. So like, I know that on the other side of the coin, like I want all the things. And so how do we manage to temper that and, make realistic promises, if that's a thing. And so these are just a few, right? And we did say all of the above. We're going to go to the next slide. Now, I don't want to spend all day here because we could just live in the suckage, but we don't want to do that. But let's just talk about some of the things that are coming at us, right? Over the last 5 years, the disruptions that we've had in our industry, in the marketplace, in the world, right? The pandemic hit us hard in so many ways, reshaped how we looked at work. We've got news headlines. We've got all the buzzwords, right? The great resignation, the great reshuffling, the great this, the talent shortages, the quiet quitting. Some of these terms are kind of silly, but we've managed to put a whole bunch of labels on the craziness that's been happening. And now we've got some economic uncertainty. Yay! So lots of organizations that were on a hiring frenzy last year now are facing hiring freezes and layoffs. And then we've got other industries, such as like in healthcare, that are struggling to find talent to fill roles. And Andrea, we were talking about this the other day, about how, you know, we've pipelined positions in the past. You put out a rec, you see who's out there. But now we're hearing a little bit more about that, but from a different perspective, which I had not really thought about. The idea that organizations might be putting postings out there to appear as though they are still thriving in this crazy economic climate. That was something that I thought was super interesting.
Well, and what's so interesting about it too, that you and I were talking about, is how do all of these revolving changes that are happening in employment laws, things like having to post compensation structures, how are those impacting these ghost jobs? And how is that going to shift the ability to have these pipeline requisitions?
Right. We've got ghosting, we've got data privacy laws. All right, blah, blah, blah. There's so much stuff that's out there, but you know, what goes around comes around. These aren't things that we've never heard of, right? It may be more technical than maybe it was when we first started, which we're not sharing how long ago that was. So there's always going to be obstacles and challenges. There's always going to be stuff that gets thrown at the feet of HR or TA that we're going to have to figure out. So the question is, where do we go from here? So we've got some changing faces in HR. And take a look at some of these numbers. I don't know if this surprises anyone. 91% of leaders say HR's role has changed dramatically. C-suite
That
executives.
didn't surprise me at all.
Okay. And
No,
C-suite
that did
executives
not
don't
surprise me
think
at all.
it's going to be slowing down. So what's the positive side of this, Andrea? What do you think when we talk about things have changed? Do you think this is going to give us a better seat at the table?
Absolutely. I think, from what we were talking about from those news headlines to seeing that 91%, and even just looking at my own career, starting out as a recruiter and then moving all the way to a chief people officer, what that tells me is there's opportunity to diversify your skill set and grow in your career. Instead of looking at those headlines and going, oh my gosh, jobs, am I going to have job security? You take advantage of these opportunities, diversify your skill set, and figure out how to be nimble and stay relevant.
Yeah. And I think this, the changing that has been happening, especially with the switch of how people want to work, whether it's working gig jobs, whether it's part-time, whether it's remote, I think there's a lot of that is driving this. And I also think where we hopefully are headed is looking at that convergence of TA and HR, because I know in my past history, TA and HR hasn't always been aligned. It felt like a little bit of a fight. We're housed under the umbrella of HR, but not necessarily included in all of those conversations. And so hopefully because of these changes, industries, companies are realizing that we all have to be aligned with a go-forward strategy if we want to make this work.
Right.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about that. Talent leaders are being asked to save the day. I think it's showing up way more on HR and TA's plate than it has in the past about what do we do? How do we make this work? And there's a whole lot of stuff that goes into these business strategies. And so, Andrea, talk a little bit about, from your experience in the HR space, where do we start on this revolving bucket, and how do we get to a place where we feel like we are saving the day or adding that value that organizations are looking for?
Well, what's interesting about this, and just in that same vein of conversation, I think one of the driving pieces to this evolution and also this talent leader save the day conversation also has to do with some of these news headlines that we have seen in regards to, bigger companies. The first one that comes to mind is like Wells Fargo, right? Wells Fargo was in the news about not being able to hire Black talent at their leadership levels. And so, of course, the trickle down is, oh, well, it's on recruiting then to find Black talent. And of course, there's Black talent in the finance industry. Come on. So that comes into play when you think about the influence that is finally being shifted, and the realization, the influence that talent acquisition leaders should have and have had all along, but were not recognized for. So now there is this recognition that you have to align the people within your organization to the strategies of the organization in order to be successful. Absolutely. Organizations are finally realizing that it's the people that you bring in that are the real gas for your strategies for success. I've been saying this for years.
Right.
Especially in the startup world. It's pivotal within startup that you hire the right people, because it's incredibly costly to not hire the right people. So when you think about how do you do that, you really have to develop a holistic talent strategy that starts with creating frameworks built on really understanding what is the organization trying to accomplish and build out from there.
Yeah, so you could argue, I think, on the left side of the screen, right? Does it start with analyzing skills? Does it start with benchmarking? Does it start with org plans? You could argue that any one of those spots has to happen before you can engage and develop your talent. And those are those conversations where TA needs to have a seat at the table. That's not just even within HR, but that is looking at the larger organization, embedded in the business, understanding those priorities before you can go through and say, I'm just going to hire someone. Because how many times has that happened, right? Go out and find me X person who can do Y. And it's like, ugh. So we find the person and then they don't succeed. We haven't done the homework. The job isn't ready. It's not what they signed up for, all of those things. So in order to make that difference, we have to be aligned and we have to make sure that we're looking at the right things before we jump in and just start hiring.
Well, and that's the difference with, really embedding yourself in the business. You have to really understand your business.
Yep.
You have to understand, what your business does, what their goals are, and what has kept them from being successful, from getting there. What kept that last person from being successful, or if it's a new position, what really needs to be accomplished so that you can really ensure that the individual that you need to find is going to have those right skills to bring that team to that next level.
Yeah, so that is a great segue to the next thing we want to talk about is how do you get to that next level, right? We have, I think, all of us, I think, in some cases really want to feel comfortable at work. We want to do things the way that we've been doing them. We get hired because we did something well in our last organization and we want to continue to replicate that. But the way, as both of us in tech, the way things are going, not necessarily going to be the option to be able to do things off of Excel spreadsheets or snail mail or, hey, fax me your resume. So we're going to shift to our next question on how do we do that and what is going to make us more effective, looking at different tools or strategies that might help us. So our next poll question is, has your organization adopted machine learning, AI, artificial intelligence, or automation in some way, shape, or form to support TA and HR? So, Andrea, how many folks do you think are going to land in the A bucket? We haven't or don't even know where to start. You think we're going to find a bunch of folks there?
Yes.
Okay, and done. Okay, what about we don't understand it or why it's important? I think there's something to be said about automation, which is very different from machine learning or AI, that I think folks are a little scared of. Okay. We understand the value prop, but we haven't made any investments yet. I'm guessing we'll find some folks landing there because it's not an inexpensive endeavor, depending on how you decide to invest in tech. We're dipping our toe in the water, or we're embracing and investing in it. So
I think if there's folks that are joining us from really large companies, those might be the people that fall within E. Like I said, my background has been in startups and, that kind of thing. So we're talking nimble as the day is long. But we also get into this rapid growth. That's really been my sweet spot, is high growth startups, where, we're growing 300-400% year over year. But when you're talking of Rebecca and I have a friend who works for a very, very, very large healthcare organization, and she leads a team that does high volume recruitment. I could see her and her team being in bucket E.
Yeah, because you almost have to. When you think about the volume and getting the right people in and driving success, you have to be able to do something to make your strategies executable.
Well, you have to, or you better be.
Well, right. You must have a plan. Otherwise, the spreadsheets are going to be awful crazy. Okay. All right. Let's look to our results and see what we have. Oh, okay.
Oh, so, a little all over the place.
I wasn't
expecting that.
I know. And I like that second bucket, that B, is the least of them, because if we've got to explain that how it works or why it's important, you're way behind, right? All right. So I
like
think
it. I like
that's
it.
pretty well split outside of we don't understand. That's the smallest bucket for
Mm-hmm.
sure. And you know, that is a challenge, right? Because in TA or HR, we don't necessarily have sometimes the biggest budgets. A lot of times we're looked at as cost centers as opposed to drivers of the business, right? Generating revenue tends to fall on sales, maybe marketing, a couple other areas. So I think that's where the challenge comes in, is saying we know what we need to do. We actually maybe even really understand it, but we don't have the buy-in from the rest of the organization. So again, when you get embedded in the business and you can showcase what's happening, when you're visible in the organization, not just siloed as, hey, here we're gonna, put you over in this little corner and throw pizza over the wall every now and then, and stay out of the big people's lanes. When we get out of that spot and get added into that conversation, I think it's easier to showcase how using automation, machine learning, AI, using technology to make us better, not taking away our jobs, not giving us, robots are taking over the world, but giving us the ability to take some of that repeatable work, that mundane work, maybe that less value added work off of our plate so we can be strategy advisors. We can focus on that talent space.
Well, and I think maybe
Oh, look, there's a
some
heart.
of
Oh,
what
sorry.
happens, I think some of also what happens in that first bucket, speaking from lived experience, is also when maybe you're a one man show, one woman show, or or maybe you're a very small team and you're already overworked and stretched so thin
Right.
that the thought of adding one more thing to your plate might break you.
Yeah, whether it's tools or processes or having to,
A project.
yep, or having to drive that. Yeah, I totally get it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this slide, I don't know that anybody's surprised that it's a bit of an uphill road, maybe through the desert, to get us to 100% of embracing technology in HR. I think we have historically fallen on the bottom edge of that. And here, out of that group that we looked at earlier, out of 1,000 HR leaders, less than 60% have adopted some kind of automation, analytics, machine learning, or AI in the HR space. So, room to
But
grow.
can I pause for a second?
Yes.
Don't you think that's so interesting, given the slide that we started back with the 91-41? 91% of HR leaders believe that, there's
Change is coming.
our jobs are so important and we've diversified, and 41% of C-suite leaders don't see it slowing down. That to me says
Bit of a
opportunity.
mismatch. Yeah.
A mismatch, but it also says if the issue is getting buy-in or getting budget, there might be some opportunity there.
Well, that's true. And if we think about, if we're looking at the facts, if we're looking inside of an organization and doing a bunch of things manually, or not able to actually put information in front of a hiring manager on why this is the right person, or vice versa, a hiring manager can't actually justify why that's the right skill sets we should be looking for. I think that's where automation, machine learning, AI comes in to help tell that story. Because if we think about from a recruiting perspective, and I think we've probably already sort of dated ourselves when we talk about snail mail and faxing in your resumes and doing things on spreadsheets. Think about, without that technology right now, what are you doing to find candidates? You're doing regular searches, maybe you're hunting in a bunch of different places. I think we all tend to go to LinkedIn, but there's other job boards, right? Is Monster still around? I think. Career Builder, Indeed, right? Zip, there's all kinds of things that are out there. If you don't have a way to organize that, you're going to all of those spaces. You're looking at resumes. What do we say? 30, 45 seconds, maybe at the most. You're looking for keywords, right? You're doing very manual Boolean or keyword searches, and you're ending up and think about even trying to search your own ATS. Forget about it. That's a nightmare. We're not doing that, right? So the talent that gets sourced from a manual perspective takes longer, is sometimes tougher to justify, puts the recruiters in a time crunch, because think about how much time that takes to actually do that, right? How many questions you have to screen for if you're not doing some sort of matching on skills and potential. So, and then recruiters don't have anything to show hiring managers, and I've done this, right? Trust me, you want to talk to Bill. And they're like, but why? It's a gut feeling. Hiring managers, not so excited about my gut feeling. They don't really care. That's right, they don't really care.
And I don't know, like, you know, some of the attendees that we have, one of the startups that I worked at was a contract manufacturer. And a lot of the applicants that we would receive, because I put together a strategy to attract these candidates, were individuals that were coming out of the military, because we had never, you know, put a strategy together to attract these people. But they had the skills that we needed. Their resumes were atrocious. And it was very hard for some of these managers who were also new to managing to be able to see the potential and the transferable skills on those resumes. Exactly. So that's a whole other, you know, issue in and of itself.
Which, well done, brings us to our next slide. Looking below the surface for talent, right? We've all seen this iceberg analogy in a lot of different places, but I think what this shows us is that if we only look at resumes and experience, we're missing a whole lot of things underneath that surface, right? So whether it's AI, machine learning, automation, helping us make those connections. Sometimes, whatever it looks like, I think we have to go deeper. We can't just rely on resumes, because remember, resumes aren't verified documents, right? Those are just words on paper that somebody's put together that they think tell their story. But there's probably a lot more to that story than what shows up on, you know, a 1 to 2 page, 3-page resume. Who does that, right? I mean, there's an awful lot of things that go into a person's background, ability, potential, that we just can't see from a 30 to 45 second scan on a particular resume. So what are we talking about? Okay, so how do we get from a let's just search a resume mindset, whether it's using technology or not? How do we get away from just a let's peruse resumes and focus on more of a skill-based, potential, transferable skills space? How do we get there? It's going to take some time, right? We've done this in the past. I worked for a large retail organization that did home shopping, so the third largest in the country. And we had a lot of crazy, really niche roles. And I didn't have any tools to do this. And they were like, find me someone who can do this. I'm like, there's like 3 people who actually have that job title in the world. And so you have to find someone who doesn't exist, right? So you're trying to figure out the skills, find that person, maybe sometimes more than one. You've got to convince them to listen to you for this non-traditional job. Then you've got to convince the hiring manager to talk to them, back to the trust me, I have a gut feeling they're going to be great. Then you've got to convince the interviewing team, and a lot of times then you've got to convince finance that they want to hire this person. So it's not that it can't be done, but man, that takes a lot of time and effort, and everything else isn't getting done when you're spending all your time trying to do this work. So using that skills-based approach helps drive towards that best fit, using facts and data, even if someone doesn't have the perfect resume. Andrea, have you ever had to do that? Dig up someone that doesn't exist for a role that nobody's ever heard of?
Yes, I really contemplated for a long time changing my title to Unicorn Hunter.
Right? Purple squirrel, whatever else we're
Wizard.
calling that. Right?
Yeah, magic maker. Yeah, everything that you just described. Yeah, those are things that I'm like, oh, yeah, they come so naturally, right? Because that's the job. But when you hear it described, you're like, yikes! Why do they make it so hard? Yeah,
Right.
This is so important to the business, but we're gonna make it impossible for you to be successful. Where do I sign up?
That's right. That sounds great.
I think everyone that's attending this webinar is really trying to figure out how they get a raise. And if they're not, you really should.
Right. Well, so if we think about that, so the first thing before you even start looking for someone focusing on skills is you have to understand what's happening in that business. I think we've said this maybe 17 times already, but understanding the organizational priorities and the business priorities, understanding that department, not just being able to read a job description, but do you know what's actually happening in that department? I will tell you that the biggest compliment I would get when to me when I was recruiting was, oh, do you work in that department? I'm like, yes, at least I know enough to be dangerous. So you have to understand not just the job description, but the business priorities. What does this look like 6 to 12 months down the road? Writing a job description and focusing on things not just about the tactical pieces, but also looking at that strategy. You can't focus to a skills-based or a potential search unless you actually know what's happening in that business.
Right. Well, and how many times have you interviewed people who have applied to your position because you wrote a great job description, but then you looked at their resume and you're like, okay, I kind of see something here, but and then when you're talking to them, you're like, why didn't you have this on your resume?
Exactly.
They have all of these amazing quantifiable successes, but no one ever taught them how to write a resume. All they have on their resume is the bullets of what they did, but not their actual successes.
Right.
I have
You're not getting the
happen
story
so many times, and it drives me nuts. I'm like, you're not selling yourself here.
But it's really hard too, right? You think about as a person, you're like, oh, I don't want to feel like I'm bragging. I don't want to put all this stuff on there. And how do I tell a story? But yet I only have to have 5 bullet points under each job. And everyone says, don't put on a summary because that's worse than, blah, 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 right? There's all kinds of things that resumes don't tell the story. So let's look at exactly what you're talking about. Let's look at hiring for skills using AI and skill matching happening underneath the surface. So let's assume that you have a marketing role that you're looking to fill and your hiring manager has said, hey, this is important: communication, product marketing, security, visualization, maybe it's social media, maybe there's some other things in there. This is what your hiring manager says that they want. Now, maybe you're not finding the right fit by looking just at folks that have a title of marketing or a very narrow view of what marketing is. If you were to look through an AI way of matching, you're looking at, oh, this community manager. Look, we've got some other things that feel like they're tangential. And then look, here are some connectors in the middle. Maybe this person who's been managing a community could be great for my role because AI has been able to look at those things that probably weren't on a resume, looking at the amount of data that's in the space right now, saying, hey, folks that are successful in marketing tend to have public relations, go-to-market strategies. AI is able to connect those dots, whether it's on your resume or not. It's able to make those connections to be able to say, I also have some data for you, hiring manager, on why you want to look at Sally with a community management background, even though you said you wanted to look for this traditional marketing background. So connecting those dots, because you just can't always tell the story on a resume. AI will help to do that underneath the surface, as well as then give you things for your hiring managers to be able to hang your hat on. Not just trust me, but take a look. And here's the data on how these folks have gone on to be successful in these particular roles, even though their title, background, or usage of these skills has been different.
Right. And this is really helpful too when you think about organizations that create job titles that are weird.
That feel fun, but make no sense.
Right. Like, you know, director of first impressions when they're really looking for a receptionist. You know, those kinds of things. It makes it really challenging to, or in tech, for example, like, you know, there's so many very niche technical positions, but what, you know, one organization would call a, you know, this type of software engineer, another organization might call an architect or a principal or, right, you know, whatever.
Right.
And, you know, if you're just getting into technical recruiting, that can be really hard.
Yeah. So let's assume, because I think we all can agree that hiring for skills or for adjacent skills for potential is a better way to go than just doing a resume review. But what if you don't have AI? What if you don't have any tools? What if you're in that bucket of we don't know where to start or we don't have the budget? There is a way for you to still do that without using any kind of technology. It takes a little bit of time, but still, it's actually a really good exercise. So what I have up here on the screen right now is something that I did in a previous life working for a restaurant company. I created basically personas that not just the specific skills on a resume, but what do we want them to do? What could their backgrounds look like that might be different? Each one of these 4 personas adds a different set of values in a workspace, right? Because the organization that I worked for tended to hire at they were continuing to look for leaders of these restaurants, to just be honest, of 40-plus-year-old white males. And we said, gosh, that doesn't even reflect who's in the restaurant. That's not a great way to do that. So coming up with these personas, doing a lot of manual analysis. Man, I wish I had Eightfold back then. It would have made my life so much easier. I digress. But I think when you do this work, and then you can put it in front of as a recruiter, you can put in front of a hiring manager and say, we need to make sure we're looking for different buckets. So I had targets set for recruiters to surface candidates under each persona to put that slate in front of folks. It could be background, it could be diversity. There was a lot of different things that we wanted to make sure that we had a slate that was not just the same Terrys. We tended to hire a lot of Terrys. But we paid attention when candidates were hired. Who were those hiring managers looking at and who were they bringing on? And if they were only bringing on Terrys, then we had a broader conversation about what does that look like. So you still can hire for skills. You can hire for potential. You can hire for the things that aren't on a resume. It just takes a little bit more time to do it a little bit more manually. And I think TA is the tip of the spear to get organizations to think differently and adopt different practices. This opens up talent pools in places that you wouldn't look. When we say things are scarce in certain markets, that's really true. So using a different way of looking at skill sets as opposed to just a resume makes the difference whether it's manual or whether it's automated. Thoughts on that before we flip to the next slide, Andrea?
I think one thing that we didn't mention on the manual is that it's really important for you know, the person leading the recruitment that they have a really solid understanding of what is absolutely critical in the role, like the top 3 things that a person has to have and what's nice to have.
That's
and because that when posting a job description, one of the things from a diversity and equity perspective is that men will apply to a job that they meet about 40% of the requirements for. Women tend to only apply to jobs that they meet 90%.
Right.
Of the requirements for. So if you have an understanding from your hiring manager on what is critical versus what's nice to have, if they give you a job description, you can separate out those requirements differently. And
Yeah, for sure.
things that are absolute, those are requirements. Things that are like, well, it would be nice that if they have that, you can change those out and even bucket those under skills, and take some of those things out. And that will start to increase more candidate traffic from different pools.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you should do that anytime, right? You should always be asking the questions, what's nice to have? Otherwise, you're just chasing your tail, right? Because if you get a laundry list of 27 things and you're like, oh, not going to happen. So you always need to prioritize that. I do think it makes more, it's even more critical when you're doing a more manual process. Agree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so organizations with a skills-based approach, we are both fans of a skills-based approach. You tend to be more agile, more likely to place talent in the right places, and organizations tend to be more innovative because you're not looking for somebody who lives in a particular box. All right, so Andrea, you mentioned something just a little bit ago, talking about DEI, DEIB, DEIAJB. I can't remember how those goes. Wait, DEIB, AJ, right? DEIB, AJ?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. We're going to talk about how does that factor into your organization. So next poll for you, audience participation, please. Does your organization have a DEI, DEIB plus strategy? We've given you less options. Yes, embedded in our organization, and Andrea, I want you to talk about that in a second. What does that mean if it's embedded in the org? Yes, I've seen a presentation. It kind of feels like maybe it's a checkbox. I think so, like you're not quite sure. Clearly that doesn't feel like it's a priority in your organization right now, or D, not that I know of. So do you want to talk real quickly about the difference between something being embedded in the organization or being a project?
Sure. So when a number of years ago, I went through the work to become a certified anti-racism educator, because I really wanted to take the work that I do in this space to the next level. And I also wanted to have a framework in order to have conversations in this space and create safe spaces in order to have those conversations. So I have been really working in this space under Courageous Conversations framework that was created by Dr. Singleton. So that's kind of where my mindset comes from and my methodology. There's other spaces people can go to or learn from, but that's mine. And so to your point, when an organization is really successful in creating a DEIB mindset and a truly inclusive culture, you know it because success in that space is not just a month or a mandate, it's how people show up. When I do these trainings, and whether it's from a part of a leadership program, part of the work I do as a full-time employee there, or specifically for DE and IB. The other thing that frequently kind of blows people's minds is when we have conversations around, excuse me, just asking the simple question of, do you know what the opposite of inclusion and belonging is? And many times people don't. The natural answer is what the antonym of the word belonging is, right? Which would be exclusion, or the opposite, excuse me, of inclusion is exclusion. That's a totally normal, logical answer.
I said
but
lonely. I think people will be lonely. right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And then you said exclusion.
Yeah.
Which totally normal answers, totally logical. However, when we talk about, cultures, whether they're workplace cultures or a society, the opposite of creating belonging is assimilation. It's having environments where people have to, change who they are in order to fit in. So one of the things that is really powerful, when you think about the most successful companies that really create belonging, is that it's not about how diversity looks, it's about how inclusion and belonging feels. So it's kind of, really changing that mindset.
Right, because if we think about inclusion is an action and belonging is a feeling, those are different. And sometimes we tend to use those interchangeably. And when we talk about doing more with less, when we talk about your organization may not have someone who is leading DEIB AJ, you may not have it as a function, but everyone can add to that sense of equity, inclusion, belonging, even if it's not a formal project. How do you welcome people? How do you talk to people? How do you make sure that they're part of something? It has to, in my opinion, and feel free to add to this or argue, which is fine. But I feel like it has to come from the ground up. It's really tough when you get from your senior leaders, you will be nice to people, right? Like that doesn't feel genuine.
No, that's so critical. So, and yes, you're absolutely right. When you really, I loved that the poll had, a big response that yes, it's embedded in our organization. If it truly is, it's authentic. It's real. It's, embedded in every day, every way by everyone. It's in your processes. It's something everyone understands and can articulate. It's also in how you frame it. You're spot on with that. I often tell people that if it's built in shame, you have to remember that messages delivered with sharp elbows will never fall on soft hearts, ever.
Right.
And it's also really important for folks to remember that inclusion is important at micro levels. So when we talk about specifically in the talent space, things like, people glancing at clocks in interviews, that's not creating inclusion. If you have an interview process that is not reflective of, a candidate that's coming through, that, and the environment in which you live, that's not creating belonging within an organization. If, your interviewers don't take the time to really learn how to pronounce a candidate's name,
that's huge.
Those are microaggressions at a micro level, and that completely violates that sense of inclusion and belonging within your organization. And what's interesting about it is that, when you change how you embed these behaviors in your company, not only does it change inclusion and belonging for your employees, but you'll see that change in how your employees then work with your customers, how you engage with vendors, how you select board members, or how you even interact with your community, because how you do one thing is how you do all things.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so important to have a conversation in every webinar or conversation I have. I feel like we have to talk about what does this look like, because there are some folks on the other side of the fence that say, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to work. I don't care about talking to anybody. Why does it matter? I just want to come in, do my job, and leave. It matters. So it is important regardless of how little you want to engage in your organization or how much you want to engage.
Mm-hmm. The other thing about really having an embedded inclusion and belonging, an authentic inclusion and belonging practice embedded in your org that really does miss the mark for most companies is the equitable access to opportunity. And if managers are not creating opportunity for all people, you really do not have embedded belonging and inclusion in your organization. Well, so it's always important to have those conversations with managers. And you can use data points like your exit surveys. How many people are leaving because they have not had development opportunities or they haven't been promoted, those kinds of things. If those things are coming up in your exit surveys, you need to question whether or not you really do have inclusion and belonging in your org.
Right. And that's where we've tied this in here under the skills section, because having a skills-based approach, a data approach, makes a whole different conversation when it comes to developing internal talent. When you're looking at folks that you want to add to your team, it's not, oh, I need to hire a Black person, or, oh, I need to hire somebody with X. It's like, let's look at what skills, what data can we look at in order to bring the right folks into the organization. And as you said, Andrea, when you look at that data and you see that you've got some issues there, that's very easy for you to go in and fix it, saying, hey, here's what we need to do, as opposed to saying, I just got this feeling that it didn't really work out well, or that person didn't seem to, but it was just a perception, right? It takes that guessing out and uses a lot of data, especially when you're focusing on skills and what people bring to the table, as opposed to what category do they fit in, female, male, whatever, or what do they look like?
Right.
All right. So we're heading into the home stretch. I know there's some questions. We'll see if we have a chance to get there. What I wanted to wrap us up with here is, what kind of things can you do right now? Whether you have technology, AI, machine learning, whether you are doing all of it from a spreadsheet, which, believe us, we've been there. We've done it. So the first thing that we recommend, we're going to give you 3 big buckets. The first place that we want you to look is in your department. If there's something constant about the workplace, it's change. And sometimes we get really comfortable and we want to continue doing the things that we've always done in the same way that we've always done it. We've already talked about at the beginning of our chat here that that's not how the world is going, and that's not how we are going to be successful. We are going to get left behind. So don't assume that your hiring frenzy of today is going to be the norm next year, or that the dearth of candidates that you have right now is going to continue. You've got to look ahead. You've got to be ready. You've got to figure out what your team can do and what you bring to the organization when things ebb and flow. Right? So improving processes, stop wasting your time with unnecessary reports, maybe clean up your desk, share your intel and your learning with the team. You've got to make sure that you're adding value and that you can showcase that value on your own desk and on your own team before you start looking more broadly. Thoughts on that?
Where do you waste the most time?
Yes, and then stop doing it. If you can.
And yeah, how do you work smarter? The other thing that I would add to this, your department, is the you in your department, especially as it pertains to, the DE&I work. One of the things that I always encourage people in that space is to do the work within you, and recognize, the changes that you may need to reconcile, in order to be a really good ally and advocate for your organization, to be more inclusive and to be a champion for belonging in your org. And that requires some radical candor within yourself, which requires bravery. And I mean, it's hard to do that.
Yeah.
So, but when you can, your bravery to do that encourages others to also do that, and sharing your learning. So, because change does begin with you. So there is a book that I recommend for folks. It's called The Person You Mean to Be. It was written by Dr. Dolly Shug. And it is such an eye-opener in just the kindest way for folks to be able to really look inside and take our kind hearts and be able to start to let them guide us to do the right things in all ways, always.
I think you're exactly right. It's got to start with you. That's right.
Yes.
All right, so we're looking around a department. We've done all the things, and now we're going to start looking around our company. What are some things we can do inside of our company, do more with less, adding value, get visible, set up meet and greets with people that you don't know or you don't know well, get an internal mentor, have conversations, start asking those questions. As Andrea said, they may be hard questions. It may make you uncomfortable. It may make other people uncomfortable. You don't want to be, what did you say? Sharp elbows? You don't want to go into everything with sharp elbows, but you do want to go into it of I'm here to listen, to learn, but also to challenge, right? How do you get visible inside your organization? Get to know your hiring managers, get to know the business. I think we've said that a lot. Whether or not they have open positions, it doesn't matter. Get to know the other folks who you partner with. Find out what's keeping them up at night besides hiring, right? What other areas in HR could you learn more about? What about marketing, branding, L&D? What about suggesting training and education for the rest of your organization? Maybe it's on interviewing, maybe it's on contingent workforce, maybe it is on belonging in the organization. What's happening in TA? What trends or laws should people be aware of? Get out there and showcase what you know and what you bring to the table. Volunteer for those cross-functional projects. Get engaged in your organization and let people know that you care not only about them, but also about the company doing well.
Right. Yeah, you can pick up so many good little juicy tips from developing those relationships. Like, if you're in tech recruiting, like, what networking groups do they go to, or where do they do community or continuing ed and those kinds of things, because those are groups then that you can recruit from. So
100%.
But a lot of where you wouldn't know that otherwise.
Exactly right. And that flows right into that last bucket of look outside your organization. What groups could you belong to that are part of the businesses that you recruit for? Is it TA or is it HR? Join or start a group. Create your own networking organization. That's how Andrea and I met, was through networking. We've actually never worked together, but we found each other as we were networking and have continued to stay in touch. Get a mentor outside of your organization. Continue your education. Take a TA, HR, PM, CM class. Take a class. Learn something. Take a course. And join those business groups.
The other thing that's also really valuable for, a DE&I perspective is, see what kind of different diversity groups there might be, whether it's a STEM-based, younger group, or, a MBA group, whatever, and have them come and tour your facility. Invite them in to your organization. Create that relationship and give back as you're seeking out things for yourself.
That's so right, Andrea. when I actually started, when we were doing, because I was in Minnesota previously, that's how we met, for MINRAC, Minnesota Recruiters, I actually hosted at General Mills. And so we got a chance to open up the doors of what was happening inside of General Mills, as well as get people together. So that was a great way for folks to see what the organization did. It was a win for everyone. And, you know, folks got to meet the bee and the, you know, get boxes of cereal, which was not a bad thing.
I still have my picture with Lucky.
Yay!
From Lucky cereal. Lucky Charms.
Okay. I will say that I have been inside that costume and it is not fun. But anyway.
I can imagine.
All right, so we're sailing right to the end here. This little quote we have at the end: in times of uncertainty, innovative talent acquisition strategies can help companies weather the storm and come out stronger on the other side. We have fixed this, and we are saying, in times of uncertainty, innovative talent acquisition strategies can help people weather the storm and come out stronger on the other side. What we do, TA, customer success, HR, is about people. So when we invest in people, when we understand what makes them tick, what makes them successful, when we understand what our organizations are striving to towards people, we become much more successful. So do more with less. Spend that time, invest in people, invest in yourself, invest in your organization. Last words, Andrea, in the last 20 seconds.
I don't know. I think we said a lot of words, but
we did.
I was putting the name of the book in the chat. Last words I will say is, you have more influence than you probably think you do. And if you really go in strong with data never lies, people. So if your gut is telling you something, get the data to back your gut up and you'll never go wrong.
That's right. Find us on LinkedIn. You have our information. The slides will be shared. We would love to continue the conversation, and we're going to flip it back on over to our host.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you for attending today's webinar. You may disconnect and have a great rest of your day.